Here we'll talk about the energy methods. So typically, you might have heard about Castigliano's theorems, and there were two of them, which you would have studied perhaps in the mechanics of solids type of course. So we will dwell a little bit more on these kind of methods. So I think the first sort of concept is energy and complementary energy. And before we go into that, first thing I think all of you would know is the law of conservation of energy, which basically comes from the first law of thermodynamics. And it says that the work done by the external forces is equal to the change in internal energy. And since we are talking about structural systems or mechanical systems, this internal energy, we are really talking about the strain energy. Okay. And one more notion which is of importance for this sort of discussion is that we are considering elastic materials. Okay, so what really is elasticity? Here I have shown three graphs of stress and strain behavior of materials. So these graphs are typically obtained by something like a UTM type of test, so uniaxial extension or compression. So basically you keep on loading the sample and keep on calculating, noting down the force, and later on that is used to calculate the stress and strain behavior. So what elastic material means is that when you are increasing the load, so it is following a certain path, right? So let's say it's following this path and it reaches a certain point, and once it reaches that point, we begin to unload it, and when we unload it, then again it follows the same path back to the origin. Okay, so any material which does this is called an elastic material, and if the path being followed here is a straight line, so that is a linear elastic material. And in this course we are always talking about linear elastic materials, but just for reference, because energy methods tend to be very powerful even for nonlinear problems, we can conceptualize something like a nonlinear elastic material also. So what it means is that when we load, let's say it follows a path which is not a straight line, and hence this is a nonlinear path. Okay, and when we unload, it again follows back the same nonlinear path back to the initial state. Okay, so loading and unloading happen through the same path, but that path is now not linear, and hence it is a nonlinear elastic material. We may also have, in fact most real materials are actually inelastic, and what inelastic means is that when we load it, let's say it takes a certain path. This path can be again linear or non-linear depending on the material, but when we unload it, it takes a different path. Okay, so this is the key difference between elastic and inelastic materials. So in elastic materials, loading and unloading paths are same, and in inelastic materials, loading and unloading paths are different. Within elastic, we can have either linear or nonlinear elastic materials, and that would depend on the nature of the path. So if the path is a straight line, we have a linear elastic material. If the path is not a straight line, that is a nonlinear elastic material. Okay, now let's consider stretching of a 1D bar, and let's consider a nonlinear elastic bar to maintain some generality. Okay, so this left hand images, these are, let's say, the initial stage of the beam of the bar. Okay, so this bar is being subjected to two end forces. It's being stretched by a force P1, and we may consider an infinitesimal element within the bar. That element would have a stress state, a uniaxial stress state of, let's say, sigma 1, and let's say it has undergone a strain level of sigma 1, epsilon 1. Okay, now we are considering a nonlinear elastic material, and let's say within this stress strain plot, as of now this material is here, so it is loaded up to sigma 1 and epsilon 1. Okay, now a corresponding graph can also be drawn in the p delta space, where the load and deflection are being plotted, And in general, in a UTM test, load and deflections are usually plotted, and later on stress and strains are calculated. So in the load and deformation regime also, we let's say it follows a certain path, and in the current setup it is at P1 and delta 1. Okay. Next we consider a second stage from 1, where let us say we increased the delta. So we somehow pulled on this bar and we increased its stretch by d delta 1. Okay, and of course as a consequence of this increase d delta 1, there is an increase in the strain also, d epsilon 1. Okay, so if we are talking about the stress strain space, this causes an additional work, right? So what is the work done by the stress? So that will be sigma 1 times d epsilon 1, and that is represented by this shaded area. Okay, so this vertical strip of shaded area represents the work done, and similarly in the p delta space we can represent the work done as p1 times delta 1. Okay, and in the p delta space this shaded area represents the work done. Okay, so if we were to write the change in internal energy or change in strain energy, the differential change will be P1 times d delta 1, which is this shaded area. Okay. Similarly, we can talk about another situation where let's call it number 3, where instead of first increasing the delta, we first increase the load. Okay. So this is basically we are essentially referring to a displacement controlled setting or a load control setting. So the case 2 which we talked about is a displacement control setting, where we had increased the delta first, and then as a consequence P increased, and then in the third we are talking of a force control setting, where we are increasing the force, which is in turn it will cause increase in the displacements. Okay, so we increase P1 by dP1, and hence sigma increases by d sigma 1. So now the work done is actually this shaded area, which is on the other side of the curve. Similarly in the P delta space, again the work done is this horizontal strip now instead of that vertical strip. Okay, and this quantity is called the complementary energy. Okay, and it is defined as delta 1 times dP1. So whatever is the elastic path of the material, okay, the differential strip area below below this curve is usually termed as energy, and above this curve is usually termed as the complementary energy. Okay, and if we assume that we are going from a totally unloaded state to a final deformation delta F, and consequently from 0 force to a final force PF, the energy can be calculated or written as the integral 0 to delta F P1 d delta 1, and the complementary energy can be written as integral 0 to Pf delta 1 dP1. Okay, so these are basically the definitions of energy and complementary energy, and if we try to visualize them a little more, let's say this is a this is a linear elastic case, this is a non-linear elastic case. So the energy under the curve, this green area, this is the energy. Okay, so this U is the energy. So when we integrate from 0 to delta F, the entire area below the curve will be called the energy, and the area above the curve is the complementary energy. Okay, so the area above the curve is the complementary energy. Now from these two figures, it can be seen obviously that for a linear elastic material, which is what we will consider mostly, the complementary energy and the energies are the same. So C is equal to U. Okay. Another interesting thing to note is that if we add the two, C plus U, that is a constant. Okay, and that constant is actually the area of this entire rectangle of which is bounded by PF and delta F. Okay, and another interesting thing is that this constant is actually path independent. So whether the material is linear elastic or non-linear elastic, C plus U is constant. Okay. Now couple of more things which we can note is, one is that the strain energy or energy is primarily a function of delta or displacement or strain, because this is a displacement control type of setting, whereas the complementary energy will be a function of the forces or the stresses. Okay, and in general both formulations have been used significantly in mechanics problems. Now before we move on, let's have a look at the cause and effect relation between force displacement pairs. Okay, so let's say we have a 1D bar like this, and we apply a force P1 and that causes a displacement delta 1. Okay, so P1 is applied which causes delta 1. So now the work done by P1 or the internal energy change is going to be half of P1 delta 1. So this is basically the area under this curve up to up to delta 1. Okay, now in the same bar, let's say we increase the force, we apply an additional force P2 which causes an additional displacement delta 2. Okay, so P2 is applied on top of P1 which causes delta 2 on top of delta 1. So the work done by P2 is going to be half P2 delta 2, and that is going to be actually this triangle's area. Okay, however the total work done by the system or the total energy of the system is going to be the entire area under this triangle. So if we call this triangle, let's say OAB, the entire area of OAB is actually the overall strain energy which is stored now in the system. Okay, so basically what we see is that this area is also coming, which is in addition to this half P1 delta 1 and half P2 delta 2. Okay, so the total work done or the total energy is half P1 delta 1, this was due to 1, and half P2 delta 2, this was due to 2. And there is an additional term, this rectangle's area is P1 times delta 2. Okay, so this additional term is actually, if you see that this delta 2 is a cause of P2, and hence P1 was already applied but it was not causing delta 2. So when there is no cause and effect relation between the force and the displacement, so for example in P1 and delta 2 there is no cause effect relation, so in that case the work done comes out to be without that half sign, right? So that is the usual work done definition. So this P1 delta 2 is the work done when there is no cause and effect relation in P and delta. But the overall work done, of course, you may consider 1 by 2 of the total force P1 plus P2 times the total displacement delta 1 plus delta 2, and of course you will see that this will also come out to be same. Okay, so try to distinguish this fact that when there is a cause and effect relation between force and displacement, the work done comes in form of half force times the displacement, and when there is no cause and effect relation between the force and displacement, that half doesn't come. Okay, and again this half is happening because of this being a straight line and this being a linear elastic material. Now let's have a look at the Castigliano's theorem, and I believe you would have seen this earlier, so this hopefully would only be a recall. We wrote that energy was this form. So if we take the derivative of this energy with respect to delta F, which is the final displacement, we get Pf, which is the force. Okay, so this is the Castigliano's first theorem, and if we take the complementary energy and if we take the derivative with respect to Pf, we get delta F. So this is actually not the Castigliano's second theorem, this is the Crotty-Engesser's theorem, and this is a more general version of the Castigliano's second theorem. And if you really see, if we consider a linear elastic material, in that case C becomes equal to U, and hence this, instead of C we can write here U, Okay, so the partial derivative of u with respect to pf gives delta f, and this is the Castigliano's second theorem. So Castigliano's second theorem is actually a special case where we have assumed linear elastic behavior. Okay, and just in case these derivatives are confusing to you, these are actually coming from the Leibniz integral rule, and you can have a look at this separately. Okay, now there are several loading scenarios which are encountered, and for them it is usually useful if we can write the strain energy forms, because they eventually help us in finding out deflections or forces, whatever are necessary. So first case is a stretching of a bar of length L, which we consider. So since it is linear elastic, we have this stress strain relation. Okay, and we have a relation between force and the stress through the cross sectional area. Okay, so the strain energy density, you may recall, is written as 1/2 sigma times strain. Okay, so the overall energy of this bar will be 1/2 times the volume integral of sigma times strain. Okay, and by using this relation, for epsilon we replace it by sigma by E. So this becomes 1/2 volume integral of sigma squared by E times dV, and then dV can be written as dx dA, right? So u becomes so there is now a length integral, there is an area integral, and we have this. And now for sigma we can replace it by p square. So sigma square becomes p square by A, and in between what has happened is that this this we have now integrated out, and it has become the area. So in going from here to from this step to this step, what we have assumed is that sigma is constant with this throughout the cross sectional area. Okay, and E is also constant throughout the cross sectional area. So in going from here to here, we have assumed that. Okay, and once we reach here, so this is the final form for the energy of stretching of a bar. And in case the load, area and E does not change with length, this length integral can be carried out, and we can get the final form like this. So in a similar way, we can calculate the strain energy for bending, right? So again, we can start with the basic volume integral, and then we go on breaking it down further. So eventually we can get the bending strain energy. Similarly, we can get energy for shear, beam in shear, right? And we can get the energy for a bar in torsion or a shaft in torsion. Okay, now once we have these energy forms, we will be able to use it for some useful work. So for example, let's say there is a cantilever beam which is given, and we have to find delta B, which is the tip deflection. Okay, and in this case we know that the moment varies as minus px. So you may recall that the bending moment diagram looks like this for this beam. Okay, so the complementary energy, or U, since this is linear elastic, both will be same, is given as m square by 2 EI dx integral from 0 to L. So for m square we replace as p square x square. Okay, then for delta B we need to take derivative with respect to P, which is the force being applied at B. Okay, and after taking the derivative, eventually we get delta B as PL cubed by 3 EI. And one thing to note here is that delta B here will be in the same direction as PB. So whatever is the direction of application of the load, this method will give us deflection in the same direction. Okay. Now similarly, let's say in the previous example we had to consider shear deformations also, right? So what we that the formula of PL cubed by 3 EI is only when we consider bending deformations or deformation due to bending. So if we have to consider deformation due to shear, all we need to do is that the overall complementary energy. So we have to consider bending energy as well as the shear energy, right? So the bending energy is given by this, and the shear energy is given by this. Bending moment and shear force come out to be like that, and then it's just a matter of, again, delta B can be calculated as the derivative of the complementary energy with respect to P. Okay, so this one we calculated earlier. This is the new addition. So this is due to bending, and this is due to shear. Okay, so this is the overall deflection considering both bending and shear. Now there can be a scenario where let's say in this case we have to find theta b, and again in the same example, right? So theta b due to the application of this load P. Now in this case we can apply a fictitious MB or a fictitious moment at point B, right? And we can note what is the variation of m of x due to this additional moment. Okay, so in this case the additional bending moment is like that. Okay. So again now we can write the complementary energy. So this here is the overall moment variation. So the first term comes from P and the second term comes from MB. Okay, and then theta B can be calculated now as the derivative of complementary energy with respect to MB. And since in reality there is no MB being applied, once we have taken the derivative, we set MB equal to 0. Okay, so now we replace for C, so we take this derivative. So after taking the derivative we reach here, and now we can set MB equal to 0. So once we set MB equal to 0, we are here, and then eventually we get this. And since we had assumed a clockwise MB, the theta B which has come out will be a clockwise rotation. Okay, and as earlier, this derivative can be interchanged with the integral because MB is not dependent on x. Let's look at a truss example. So let's say in this case we have to find vertical deflection at point C. There is an applied load of 4 kilonewtons, right? A and E are given. So again, since we have to find vertical deflection at C, we need to apply a fictitious load at P, of P at C, right? So our downward load of P we are applying. So whatever deflection will come out will be a downward deflection of C. Okay. Now for each member, since now these are truss members, so N, A and E will be constant throughout. So for each member we can write the energy as N square L by 2 AE. And for the system, since there are 3 members, the overall will be the sum of the 3 members. Okay, so then we need to apply P vertical at C, and then delta C will be given as the derivative of U with respect to P. Okay. Now since in reality there is no load P being applied, so we will have delta C equal to derivative of U with respect to P, and then we put P equal to 0, right? So eventually we are trying to calculate something of this kind. So in cases where there are multiple members, it is usually helpful to do these things in a tabular manner. So we write for each member AB, AC and BC, we write N. N is the axial force in the members. This can be found out either by method of joints or by method of sections. But in this case, since we would want forces of all the members, it is better to use method of joints. Then we take derivative of N with respect to P. We can also pre-calculate what is P N when P is set equal to 0. These are the lengths, and then in this expression, these are the things which are varying from member to member. A and E happen to be constant for different members, although it is possible to consider different A and E for each member also. So for each member we calculate this green box which is varying, then we calculate the sum of that, right? And then delta C just comes out to be this, right? So this numerator comes from here, and this is A, this is E, and eventually it comes out to 0.133 millimeters. And since we had assumed P to be in the downward direction, this is this deflection is in the downward direction. Let's look at another example where there are multiple members, but we are talking of a beam. So now let's say this is the beam given ABC. We have to find the vertical deflection at C. Okay, E and I are given. Now there is a load being applied at C also, 60 kilonewtons. Now for our purpose, initially we can assume that that is P, and later on we will put the value of P to be equal to 60 kilonewtons. So we assume that this is the load P is being applied like that. Okay. And another interesting thing is that it is not necessary that all the members have the same origin. So for example, here we have two segments, AB and BC. So for AB we can consider origin at A with limits from 0 to 9. Okay, and then so basically then we are writing our the expression for m of x like this, where x is being measured from A. So this m of x comes here, and for the span CB we can consider origin at C. So basically then we are starting at point C, where there is a load P being applied, and this is the m of x, and this comes here. Okay, so so we can write m of x, then we can take the derivative of m with respect to P, and the deflection is simply du by dp with P being set at 60 kilonewtons, right? So we just take the expressions from the table above, we write it down. When we calculate, we can again get the overall expression, right?